A little while ago, I did a video on shorter fencer versus the taller fencer. Now, this was in response to questions that I get all the time from shorter fencers about how does somebody who is not as tall as I am, how do they engage somebody who has got, like me, they're very tall, they've got, long monkey arms. How do they engage in rapier contest against them in a fashion that's going to allow them to succeed? Now, at that time, I spoke a lot, and I backed it up with tournament footage of myself facing, the Jolly Green Giant, as it were, about how you defeat that person by taking away that which they offer you. Every time that that person attacks, they have to offer you something, whether it is the arm that you can take away from them, and they'll bring it out to you, whether it is the leg that they're bringing to you because they have to step toward you. The flaw that I pointed out in that video was that so many fencers focus on trying to kill the opponent as opposed to taking away that which makes them strong, their ability to move, their ability to offend. This video is going to cover a second thing that shorter fencers need to keep in mind. And to be quite honest, it's not just shorter fencers. I see taller fencers doing this as well. But it applies in particular to the shorter fencer who doesn't have the same range on their opponent that the taller fencer has over the shorter opponent. And that is how long you spend inside that person's range. I see this happening all the time. The shorter fencer lines up, and then they tweak their measure just a little bit, and they tweak the measure just a little bit, and they get a little bit closer. And next thing you know, they're within range of the taller fencer, but they themselves are not able to offend that taller fencer because they're not in their own range yet. It does you no good to wait around thinking about how you're going to defeat someone when you are within their range and they are not yet within yours. All that does is offer them all the time in the world in order to make repeated attacks against you. Even if you just go by the law of averages, if that taller fencer is taking 3 and 4 shots at you for every 1 shot that you're able to get on them, well, law of averages alone says that they're likely going to hit you far more often than you're going to hit them. And of course, if they're particularly smart, they will utilize that measure in order to keep you within their ability to strike, but you are not able to strike them in return. Now, here's how we get to fixing that little flaw. And that is, when you are facing somebody and you're at the very edge, let's say for sake of argument, I am right now at the very edge of my opponent's ability to strike me. He, with just the tiniest step, would be able to actually close and be able to strike me. Well, that's a very safe place for me to be. Now, if I'm going to be the one who initiates the attack against that taller fencer, it looks something like this. You'll note, it is not No. I see that, however, all the time. I see the person close to within that measure. They're in range of that taller opponent, and they're thinking about how they're going to close with that person. If you are a student of mine, if you've been watching the videos, right? A little thing I call the 2-target concept. You attack the sword, then you attack the fencer behind the sword. I can tell you, if the length of the arm, if the length of the sword, if having a longer reach was the only thing that mattered in a fencing contest, or if it was just so significant that it gave the advantage and the likeliness of victory to the taller opponent, I can tell you right now, I would not have had the success against taller opponents that I have had. Every time that I've ever faced that taller opponent, I can tell you in all honesty, I am the one who came away the victor. And I can tell you it is precisely because I attacked that weapon and then I attacked them. I did so by closing with them and immediately following into the action that was allowing me to either control the sword or I'm attacking the fencer. I do not wait around inside that person's measure, inside that person's ability to strike me, unless I have control, positive control of that weapon. If you have that, by all means, hang out all day long. Hang out as long as you like, because if you have control of their sword, there's nothing they can do to you. Realistically speaking, talking about the spar, each time you gain control of your opponent's weapon, it's going to be for a second, maybe a little bit less. Fencing is measured in fractions of a second, so that's really all the time you need anyway. Again, shorter fencer, taller fencer in front of me. I'm outside the range, but with one step, I can close with that person, and I'm immediately taking that shot, whatever it is, whatever hole in their defenses that I saw, I'm going to make that attack. Deal with the sword, deal with the fencer. You do it in that order, that's already a huge advantage. But when you are that shorter fencer, engaging the taller fencer. Use your footwork to close with them, immediately attack, get back out. Now, let's talk about what that does not mean. That does not mean to throw chance to the wind and just immediately fly in there with some flèche attack against your opponent. I am not advocating that at all. The sword fight is about controlling that weapon. When you commit to the flèche like that, you're leaving it up to chance in terms of whether or not you're going to even survive that engagement. Because looking at it from a martial perspective, I flèche against my opponent, and I am fortunate enough that I actually strike my opponent. I run them through the chest. Well, now I am right up on them. Guess what they are not? They are not yet dead, and they could potentially take me with them, and my sword is bound up in their body. There's nothing I can do. There's really very little left for me to defend myself with. It would be a very period way to die, both of us stabbing each other, but when it comes to being a swordsman and being a successful one at that, it's not really an acceptable outcome. So no, do not charge your opponent. I am not advocating for you to flèche against them as a tactic, as your strategy for dealing with the taller swordsman. The strategy, the tactic that you do employ, gain control of the weapon, then come after the person. So let's talk about that footwork just a little bit. This is a regular sized advance. Regular sized retreat. The length of your stride, however, can also be used to a very deceptive and advantageous end. I want to close with my opponent. I show them a regular sized advance and a regular sized retreat. Then a not so regular sized advance. You can extend that initial advance step on there so that way you close with your opponent. Now, if you've already programmed them to believe that your advance is this big, and then all of a sudden you follow it up with something longer, that too is a very effective use of footwork in order to gain the range, in order to gain the ability to strike your opponent.